So I've had CEOs of large corporations, and the attitude is, I've got so many mansions, I've got so many yachts, I own an island in this place, and look at me. And the Chinese couldn't give a shit. They really don't. Because Chinese culture is very what they call hanshu. You're supposed to be humble. What I used to see happening with these guys is they would come in and they'd be trying to negotiate something, and the word would get out, hey, this guy's a jerk. Don't help him out, just kind of send him on a goose chase. And they would send them somewhere else. And the guy would be going around in circles until he went home with his tail between his legs, because they didn't understand the concept of politeness and respect.
Okay. Hi guys, welcome into MPods. We're here with Robert Fisch of InCorpChina, and he's been doing international business for 40 years. And Robert, can you please just give us a brief introduction of who you are and what you do at InCorpChina?
Sure. I'm an American, originally from Boston. Go Blue, Michigan, Lanse Jiao. I learned my Mandarin back in the late 70s, early 80s, before it was popular. And I learned it in Ann Arbor. At that time, Ann Arbor was one of the first schools that was very famous for learning Chinese. Leonard Woodcock was the first ambassador to China. He was a professor in Ann Arbor, and he was also from General Motors. And they had Michael Oxenberg, who was the advisor to President Nixon when they were first starting the relationships. Things started to normalize after ping pong diplomacy. And there were very few people learning Mandarin at that time. So, John, I think you can relate. I know that you've studied philosophy. I was learning Chinese literature, and I was in the honors program in Ann Arbor, so I was learning Chinese literature, and we were reading Zhuangzi, Laozi, Mengzi, Shunzi, Honglou Meng, Xi You Ji, and all of the classics. And I became so intrigued that I began learning Mandarin. And I speak 8 languages, but by far the most difficult was Mandarin. And we used to fear our teacher, 老师, because with other languages, you can fake it a little bit. If Spanish, you can fake French a bit. And if French, you can maybe do another Romance language and get away with at least partial credits, right? If you don't know your Chinese character, you're done. Either you know how to write it or you don't. So she would make us memorize everything. They would call that 背下来, and you need to 朗诵, you need to recite. So she would call on us, and if we weren't totally prepared, she would look at us in disdain and wave her hand and go on to the next student. So the only thing that she didn't do, which was very traditional Chinese, because she couldn't, being in America, is she wasn't able to hit us. In China in the old days, they would take a ruler, put out your hand, you lazy kid, and they would take your hand, right? A little bit military. She wasn't able to do that. And when I was living in China, so in Ann Arbor, I started my Chinese. First semester were 60 students, and most of them were Meiji Huachao. They were Chinese Americans. So us white boys thought it was very unfair because they can speak at home, and we don't know anything. By the second semester, there were 30 students. By the second year, there were 15 students, and by the third year, there were only 6 students. They were dropping like flies because the teacher would tell us, don't be lazy Americans, do your homework or don't bother me. She was, I have to thank her, she was brutal, but it helped me to learn. I used to walk around the campus of the Diag with flashcards, reciting out loud Chinese. I'm sure that the students must have thought I was on drugs. What's the matter with this guy? Walking around talking to himself. And I used to go to the Asian library where I could find Chinese students to practice with. And I think I had a reputation on campus as the crazy American learning Chinese. And they would say, oh my God, he's going to come to practice with us. Run, he's not crazy. I was the only American who was part of the Chinese Students Association, and I was learning Chinese cooking and Tai Chi. I had a Singaporean teacher of Tai Chi who was learning history, and he had rebelled against learning Chinese in Singapore because there was the English stream of education and there was the Chinese stream, and he was a rebel. He didn't want to learn Chinese. So he was in university learning Chinese together with me. And so I learned my Chinese in Ann Arbor, and I was absolutely possessed to go to China. That's all I wanted to do. Going to go to China. And at that time, there were really very few businesses operating in China. Not long after, like I said, the ping pong diplomacy, normalization of the relations. And I couldn't get to China right away. So I ended up in Boston's Chinatown. I couldn't get to China. I went to Chinatown. And I was teaching English to Southeast Asian refugees, many of them who were ethnically Chinese, because it was a struggle. If they were from Cambodia or Laos or Vietnam, if they were Chinese, they were treated differently, that they might not be as loyal to their home country and this and that. And I went into class, and I wasn't particularly culturally aware yet. I could speak Chinese, but I hadn't lived there. And in the middle of the class, these students who were maybe in their 30s or 40s, who had seen their families wiped out, would get up in the middle of the class and erase the blackboard for me and pour me tea, which was a deep sign of respect. And I'm like this punk ass American kid saying, "Mellow out, guys. I can erase the board myself. It's okay. Don't worry." And I came to learn from that. And they were never happier than when I finally got to China and came back from China. And my Chinese really improved a lot. So that's how I got started. And I was hosting Chinese delegations in Boston for the tech companies. I told them, if you're going to do good work with China, you need to understand the language, you need to understand the culture. And I was able to convince them to let me host the Chinese delegations that were coming in. So we had Data General and Prime Computers, and I'm not sure, Wang, at that time they had Wang Computers. I don't think that exists anymore. That was the first Chinese big techie company. And I hosted those delegations. And finally, because of one of the delegations I hosted for Hewlett Packard, I ended up finding out that Hewlett Packard's marketing strategy was to donate medical equipment into China with the hope that after making the donations, then they could start to sell stuff to China. So there was a group called Project Hope, the good ship Hope, that was going into developing countries' ports after World War II, where people could come on the ship to get medical care. And the Chinese government invited Project Hope to go to China. So they created a job for me to be the liaison with the Chinese government. So I would meet the the university presidents, I would meet the local mayor, and in Hangzhou, from Zhejiang, Hangzhou was the Hangzhou Shi de Shizhang, the governor, the mayor, I should say, the mayor of Hangzhou at that time. And my job was to keep the relations going between the two countries. And as much as it was before, it still is now, that keeping it human and having that interaction and respect is so critical. So if I was going to give one piece of advice that I advise my student interns who are going to do things in China, whether it's newly established techie companies or whether it's, in your case, maybe investment, keep it human. Critical. I'm not a techie by background, but a lot of my new clients are techies. And there's an understanding that if you want to engage with China, you need to know how to approach the people locally. You can be the star of tech, but if you don't know how to approach the people properly and build the relationships, it's very hard to be successful there.
Yeah, that was one of the questions that we have is piggybacking off of that. How would you advise businesses or people to build authentic relations in China?
I think one of the critical things is you have to actually spend time there. So one of the big struggles that you see in the modern world is that while tech and virtual and AI is all the rage, right? Traditionally, when a new technology comes up, everybody goes cuckoo about it. And then they iron out the kinks. And so there's the extreme that everything's perfect about the new thing, this euphoria. And it somehow comes back to the middle. There has to be a balance, right? And when I met the trade commissioner earlier last year in Shanghai, he told me one of his biggest problems till now today is making sure that when Americans go to China, that they're not arrogant. And I've seen that happen so many times. You'll get a CEO of some corporation, right? And they're going there to try to negotiate something. And there's different culture and a different approach for different types of success, right? So the Wall Street approach might work great in Wall Street, but it might not work in other places. I don't think the Wall Street approach works very well in Korea either. So you have to understand where it is that you're working. So I've had CEOs of large corporations, and the attitude is, I've got so many mansions, I've got so many yachts, I own an island in this place, and look at me. And the Chinese couldn't give a shit. They really don't. Because Chinese culture is very what they call hanshu. You're supposed to be humble. And so when the people come in with this attitude, the Chinese are very polite. They won't say it to your face. But what I used to see happening with these guys is they would come in and they'd be trying to negotiate something, and the word would get out. Hey, this guy's a jerk. Don't help him out. Just kind of send him on a goose chase. And they'd go to one Chinese ministry and they'd be polite and drink tea and they'd say yes when they really mean no, and they would send them somewhere else. And the guy would be going around in circles until he went home with his tail between his legs, because they didn't understand the concept of politeness and respect. And in the past, I've had to educate some of the bosses from these companies and hold their hand. So I had a project going on in Zhuhai where BP was building the single largest investment ever in Zhuhai, what they call a PTA factory, a purified terephthalic acid factory. It's a polymer used in Coke bottles or Pepsi, whatever, plastic bottles for beverages. And the customs chief for that area showed up in their office. And in the old days in China, this concept of everything being crazily scheduled, and you need permission, right? To the point nowadays where I haven't learned the etiquette of the new generation. Do I need to ask a friend if I'm allowed to call them on the phone? You have to text them first. Is it okay to talk to you? You know what I mean? It's a different dynamic. They would show up. So this guy showed up, and the receptionist, the Fuyuan, the receptionist at the desk, sent him away. So here's this high-ranking official stopping by, pay respects, and they just sent him away. It wasn't a great way to get started. So I went to meet this guy. I didn't know him, and because we were having some trouble. They had an entire vessel of pipes happily sailing its way from Italy to build the factory. The first step is put in the sprinkler system. And the guy in Italy didn't realize you need import licenses. And what they would have done is they would have impounded the vessel and paid all kinds of demurrage and penalties and would have had a black mark in the customs house. And the project would have been a pain in the ass to get anything going after that, because there'd be a lack of respect and lack of trust. So I found my way to what they call the Dichu Haiguan Guanzhang, the district commander of customs. And I didn't know him, but I got in the elevator and I asked the people, where's the boss's office? And they said it's on the 5th floor. And I got to the 5th floor and I walked right in. And before they could stop me, I made it look like I was supposed to be there. Walked with authority right into the guy's office. And at first he looked up at me like, oh my God, what did the cat bring in? I started speaking Chinese with him and he was so excited. He asked me to sit down and to drink tea together. And this kind of ritual of a tea ceremony is not unusual in China. And you sit, and the concept is you're sharing stories, tell them, they want to know about your children and where you're from and where you grew up and all of that. And so we went through the tea ceremony. And the next thing I did is I invited the CEO of BP to come and join me. And I said, it's not interesting for the customs commander to know that your company is the largest oil company on earth and how important you are and how puffed up you are. It's really not interesting. What you need to do is come and show respect. Tell them you're honored to be there working with them. They love children. Show them pictures of your kids. And just get some human touch. They call that, I think Zhang will understand, 搞一点人情味. Create some human touch. Or 搞好关系, to build some relationship. And that's so critical. One of the big differences between United States and China, and I think Korea would be the same too, is that China is a relationship culture, whereas America more and more is becoming a transaction culture. So understanding what it is that you're dealing with and how to approach it is very important, both from a relationship point of view. I think Zhang will understand because she's studying philosophy. It's a different philosophy as well. It's a yuan fen, which means that there's like a fate, something that's meant to happen. There's some human connection there. And what's very disappointing nowadays is that every country goes through cycles and has challenges. But one of the number one rules in China is that you don't air your grievances publicly. You don't shame somebody in public. You don't make them lose face. And 没有面子, right? You don't do that. So you've got all of these people saying, oh, we're big China experts and China's bad this and China's bad that. And they're forgetting the real basics. You say, how can these guys say that they're a sinologist? They're a China expert. And they're just ranting and raving, insulting people, which is a cardinal rule that you don't break in China. Doesn't mean that China's perfect. They got problems, but you quietly do that behind closed doors. You don't get up and rant and rave. The previous trade commissioner of Shanghai was a Shanghainese who was born in Shanghai and grew up in Florida. And what he told me was the most sad and most frustrating for him was what he referred to as the 口水战. 口水战. John, how would you translate 口水战, you think?
Like verbal fights.
Yeah, verbal fights. Literally, it means saliva. Ko is mouth, shui is water. So it's basically saying China's talking shit about America, America's talking shit about China, and it's like pointing fingers like little kids, and it's this downward spiral. And what the trade commissioner said, and he could intimately understand because he's a Shanghainese, but he grew up in Florida. So he knows both places, right? How sad it was to see this war of words going at one another. And being able to keep people talking is so critical. Keep the people talking. So during COVID, when the Chinese were struggling, I mean, it was painful for me to watch. I had relatives and I had my colleagues doing a Zoom call like us today. You've got the different tiles and you can see the people. Suddenly somebody would disappear. Say, what's going on here? So somebody would disappear. And then I would get a text message on my WeChat. Sorry, I'm downstairs in my building. They're swabbing my nose for COVID because somebody upstairs got COVID. And then they would seal off the entire building. And then they had to have only certain things could happen certain days of the week and try to get food delivered and all of that. And throughout that, they were still one day in lockdown, another day at the ministry or the Yinhan, the tax bureau or the bank to keep the process moving. So when I finally was allowed to go back to China, the first thing that I did is I threw a big banquet in honor of all of the staff and all of their hard work during COVID. So I told them, bring your spouses, bring your children, bring your parents, bring your friends, whoever you want to bring. And we threw a big party, nice food, a little wine. And some of my staff during COVID had gotten married and had a kid already. And so I got back to China. I got to see them, to meet their spouse, to hold their kids and to show some respect. And the human touch and politeness and etiquette and hosting and giving faith is so strong. So in the early days, when you still needed ration coupons for your food, I would get invited to a village. And I didn't realize, I wasn't aware that they would pool up some money or spend a month's salary to buy a chicken because I was the honored American guest. They had never met an American before. And I would be so humbled, and it would make me sad to think that, God, what kind of trouble am I bringing to these people if they have to borrow money so they can put on a big feast for me? And on my next visit, I would make sure that they didn't know I was coming because then they couldn't fuss. I'd bring the food with me. I'd bring a chicken or bring whatever they would like. And you compare and contrast. When I lived in Hangzhou, Boston and Hangzhou were sister cities. So I volunteered to bring a delegation from Hangzhou to Boston. And I arrived in Boston. The mayor at that time didn't want to meet with them because in their mind, oh, China is just a poor backward country, right? And the state senator gave them about 10 minutes of his time. And then when it came time to have lunch, rather than having a big banquet and really, they call that 客气礼貌, politeness and hosting and Jedi and Geimians and Hushuang Zunzhong means to mutual respect. Instead of doing that, they pointed to them in the direction of the staff cafeteria. So here you have the Chinese officials, and they're giving them a plastic tray to go and have a tuna fish wrapped up in cellophane and Glad wrap, and teaching them how to take a cup to push the Coke machine. But people didn't drink Coke in China. They had tea, and you'd have a tea ceremony and a tea ritual. I was so embarrassed by what was happening that I rented a van and I brought the whole delegation back to my house in the suburbs of Boston. And my wife's a good cook. We cooked a big banquet and we had good food. We had nice wine. And I had the Chinese delegation sitting around the piano with me, singing Chinese folk songs together. There was such a concept of respect that when I got back to China, the mayor came to pick me up by himself, which was rare. In those days, they had something called a Hongqi, a red flag mobile. It was a communist car that had curtains on the sides. And he didn't come in with a driver. He came in his own car. He picked me up. He brought me back to his home, which was in those days a little bit dangerous. You needed to keep away from the evil foreign devils, the evil influence and the Jingshan Wuran, the spiritual pollution, right? And then he invited me to meet his neighbors and drink tea together. And then after they invited me, and I was a volunteer in Project Hope. I was the liaison. They invited me to the state guest house, and they served a 15-course banquet where they carve the watermelon to look like a peacock, and they take the cucumbers and make it look like a dragon and all of that. And it was this amazing experience based on Hu Shuang Zhong, which is mutual respect. So what I do recommend highly when I'm dealing with my clients and giving advice is that you need to keep it human, and you're not going to use WeChat and texting and Instagram or TikTok or any of those Xiaohongshu. That's not going to cut it if you want to make a relationship in China and keep things going to grow some business. It's just not going to work. I don't ignore it as a tool. It's certainly easy. I have a WeChat QR code on my name card. I'm very proud. I have the WeChat of the president of Bank of China and other officials that we do with the WeChat. But you have to spend time and you have to take the effort to get to know the people. And when I was locked out of China because of COVID, after 3 years of constantly hearing relentless Koushui-Jan, this war of words stuff just being drummed into your head, evil China, bad China, bad. And then you hear the same coming from China. When I got back there, I had lost my compass because only by spending time with the people can you find out for yourself what's really going on. And I got back to Shenzhen. And in the 3 years that I was gone, instead of 5 subway lines, because Chinese infrastructure is amazing, instead of 5 subway lines, they had 15 in 3 years. And everywhere I looked, there were new high-rises, offices, and apartments. And how did I know that the apartments were full? Because there was laundry hanging out the windows. Because even wealthy Chinese prefer to put the laundry out to dry and not use a dryer. I thought I was being such a great son-in-law when I bought my elder mother-in-law a clothes dryer and a microwave. She didn't want any part of it. I think they just gathered dust because they make all the food fresh. And in America, if we want to feel that we've made it big, you're a new immigrant, you're struggling, then the goal is that you don't just have one refrigerator, you need to have 2 refrigerators so the one in the garage can hold all the stuff from Costco, right? Where you can go and fill it up. But in China, the more traditional, the elder generation would go to the market every day. You don't go and stock up for a month. So the rhythm with my mother-in-law, may she rest in peace, they'd go for dim sum every day. And that would be a big chunk because I also speak Cantonese. So then the whole place was fussing about the Guilo, the foreign devil who is speaking Cantonese. And then we'd go to the market. And in the market, you would know all the people. You'd go to the same guy for fish and the guy for beef and pork and vegetables and all of that. And it sounds crazy, but over and over again, when I am able to break the ice and keep some human relation in China, you can negotiate just about anything, and they're willing to help. But you have to take that effort to build the relationship and to not be brainwashed in either direction. And actually spend time is so important, Eric. So do you want me to tell you a little bit more about some of my recent business clients? Would that be good?
I think Hojin and Simon have a question because I know you hit on the siloing that's going on between the two nations of the United States and China. That's really been happening in the past couple of years. And I think they might have a question about the geopolitical context, which I think your opinion would be very valued on.
Okay, I'll do my best. I'm not a politician. I try to keep people talking, but I'll do my best.
Okay, so we have a dual question. So based on the recent TikTok ban and the tensions there, A, where do you see that affecting geopolitical things, and how do you see the US-China relations going in the future?
I think that my approach has been do whatever I can do, not to keep people talking, not to keep people twittering, not to keep people with Xiaohongshu or Sogo or those things. Keep people talking. It is so critical because these other methods of communication cannot and will never replace the human touch in China. And worrying about if this app or that app is working for the relations, I think it's beside the point. What we need is the people to continue talking. So I was in Beijing with a client from Ashtabula, Ohio, small town where they were doing vaping products. And they were being considered as an acquisition by China Tobacco, which is probably the largest tobacco company on the planet. And we arrived at the meeting. I stayed up all night and translated into technical Mandarin the service offering and so on. And the China Tobacco guys came in dressed in their military garb with all the medals hanging down. And they had the local Mi Shuzhang, the party secretary. And they had the local Jokan, which is the monthly journal about tobacco. And they had the local TV station. And so we had the board of directors of China Tobacco on one side, and we had these other journalists and party secretary and so on. And then the sense of distrust between the two sides was so strong that you could cut it with a knife. And I got up in front of the audience, and I think that Xiao Zhang can understand this one. They used to call me Xiao Fei, and then I became Da Fei, and now I'm Lao Fei. That means when they first know you, you're the younger, then you're the middle, and then you're the elder. Now I'm the elder. So I got up in front of the audience that were all tense, and we don't trust the Americans, you don't trust us, this thing. And I said, 同志们,朋友们,各位来宾, 你这么热烈欢迎我，我很感动. That means, comrades, friends, esteemed guests, you so warmly welcome me, humbled. And they just flat out broke out in hysterical laughter. Because for them to see an American foreign devil addressing them in communist style language was unheard of. And it would be akin to, in America, you would say, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears kind of thing. And at the Peking Duck lunch, I had the chairman of China Tobacco singing Chinese pop tunes with me. And this concept of breaking the ice, and I could also recite Tang poetry like Zhang and I were doing together just now. And I could sing songs. In the early days in Shanghai, I met Jiang Zemin when he was just Shanghai Shizhang. He was just the mayor of Shanghai. And back in those days, there wasn't a huge amount of entertainment going on. So part of the entertainment was the foreign devil singing Chinese songs. And I would get up and they would make formal toasts, 为了中美友谊 for U.S.-China friendship, 干杯 for the four modernizations, 为了中国最伟大的前途 for the great future of China. And we'd make these toasts. And then we'd be singing songs together to keep the things going with China. So important. And it's been challenging and a little bit sad, to be honest with you, because my whole life I've been a bridge between the two countries. And to see it turning back to the old McCarthy communist scared blah 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 routine it's off the wall. It's not necessary. Keep the people talking. And in terms of, I know you guys are part of an investment club, right? Just so I can bring it back to business, to something more in line with what you might be thinking. Many of my clients are the Ernst & Young, Price Waterhouse Young Entrepreneur of the Year. And all of their companies go through round A and round B, or Series A and Series B funding. And you get venture capital and you get private equity and all of that, right? And all of that, I understand, is necessary to develop and go forward, but very important to keep it human and to remember to have some heart, I think is so important. A great example, I was dealing with a company called Jungle Scout. If you guys want to Google it, you can. But Jungle Scout, during COVID, hired 50 people. 50 people during COVID they hired. And we were responsible to set up the entity. To set up an entity in China, you need 45 statutory declarations. In America, you get online, you go on to, for example, in Florida, sunbiz.org, you give your credit card, and in half an hour, you have an entity. And so we went through all the steps. When the owner of the company showed up in China, using the Chinese style of respect, I waited for him at the airport with a sign with his name on it. I got a cross-border car to bring him from the Hong Kong airport into Shenzhen through the border. In the Shenzhen border, it's called Shenzhen Koan. And we went directly into the bank because he only had a few days. And my staff met me at the bank with a stack of documents that all need to be chopped and approved, and to do what they call the KYC and the CDD, know your customer. And you needed to get approved. It could take several months. And I went in to do the tea ceremony. So I went into the bank manager's office and we sat and did a tea ceremony. We talked for an hour and a half, just getting to know one another. She had kids in Los Angeles and some kids in Tokyo, and what they were doing and what my kids were doing and where we grew up and all of that. And when we got done, she came out of her office and she said to her team, please open up the bank account for our VIP guests today. So instead of it taking 3 months, we had that face-to-face contact. There was trust, there was confidence, and then off we went. And it came to happen that the private equity firm that was funding this project in China suddenly decided, oh, shut down the entity next week and fire everybody. We don't think that the multiples are high enough. And I had to find the owner of the company. Took a while. He was in Austin, Texas. And I said, Greg, that's not how it works in China. You have to do things with respect. You need to let the Public Security Bureau know and the Labor Bureau know, and you have to give proper severance pay. And there's a set of regulations about how you do things. You don't just, that might work in America, but it's not going to work in China. And you don't want to see some of your staff beaten up either. So I was able to get through to them finally and understand that it was a phased approach to things. And I'm proud to say they listened. And now when I went back after COVID, that company began hiring people again. So important to understand in our work in private equity and angel investors and all of the Wall Street stuff that is the holy grail, which I can understand. If young people are doing finance, they'll want to be in Goldman Sachs, right? And so on. It's all good, but important to keep some heart in the whole thing.
I have a follow-up question. So I think so you mentioned about how we should like keep talking to people and then instead of just going on social medias and to have a real understanding. But like for students or just like every like young people, like what actionable steps do you think we can take? Like maybe like here in the US or people in China too?
I think that LinkedIn is okay, but if you think about how many hundreds or thousands of people you've connected with on some social media thing, how many of them have you actually had a private conversation with or met with them? And that's the key. I think that I'm still very old-fashioned, that I like to meet the people face to face. And I have not been able to bridge the gap between virtual and the real world very successfully yet. People are trying to convince me that yes, you can create genuine human relationships just by a Zoom call. It doesn't work for me so far. Even I want to talk to my son sometimes, he's texting with me, right? So I think Jung, you're now in Ann Arbor, right?
Yeah.
So I would say it would be good for you to reach out to some of your professors and get to know them if you can. Have a cup of coffee, have a mentor, right? And then actually get a chance to start talking to people in the fields that you're interested in. Because I deeply believe in Yuan Fun, that things happen for a reason, right?
Yeah.
And if you can build up those relationships, the path that you're supposed to follow will happen. You can't force it, right? Even when I lecture to groups of financial executives, which I've done in 6 different countries about China, I always say to them, I will only feel successful today if I have ongoing dialogue with either you in the audience, or if I hear that among the people in the audience, you guys start communicating better with one another, that will also make me happy to keep the people talking. So I would say if you could set a goal for yourself about building up those relationships from you've had a lot of experiences with internships and stuff. Yeah, or not?
Yeah. Some. I have some.
Okay. All right. Have you kept touch with those people? Do you call them up? Do you have a cup of coffee? Do you let them know how things are going to try to keep it human? I know it's more and more difficult now, but I think it's so critical.
Yeah, yeah.
So if there's something that I can do to help, let me know. I'm happy to introduce friends, or anybody on my LinkedIn thing is open to get the people together. I had an intern from Belgium, and I introduced them to the China Belgium Business Council chief. And they themselves, being a young person, were kind of shy. They're not going to talk to me. Who am I? So I have thick skin. I don't mind. If they tell me to go away, I'll go away. Who cares? So I called on the phone to the head of it. It was a Chinese woman, and she was Shanghainese. So I called her up, and I didn't even speak English. I just started speaking Chinese with her. And then I spoke Shanghainese with her. And I said, all I want you to do is, I've got a young person who's interested in pursuing a career with China. I know you don't have a job for them. All I want you to do is to agree to have a cup of coffee with them. And they said yes. And then I sent them off. So if there's some way I can help with that to keep it going, I'm very happy to do that. But I just urge you along the journey to keep it as human as possible and to keep touch with people, having mentors and being able to build up more than just virtual things, I think is critical.
And
It's a
then
mix.
I was curious about some other things with about your background, and I know we talked about Tang Dynasty poetry,
Yes.
and I know you're also a big fan of Tang Dynasty poetry. Is there,
Yes.
and on the topic of keeping it human as well, is there any particular aspects of Tang Dynasty poetry? And I know it's been influential in Chinese culture for over 1,000 years. So a couple questions is, why do you think it's been so influential?
I think because it talks so much about these human relationships and struggles of people. They even have different topics that John probably knows about. They have a topic called 怀才不遇. And that means that you have people who are very talented but can't reach their full potential. And then they have these long poems about their struggles and so on. I think that the thing that has made it so universal is that all of us have our own personal struggles, right? And how we can grow and learn from that. But I think that the universal appeal that's lived for so long is all the human emotions involved, like we talked about, seeing people off. So back in the Tang Dynasty, the guy is singing and dancing to see off his friend at the shore by the boat. And this Chinese family that I met yesterday insisted, after sharing life experiences with me, to see me off at the door of the shop to go outside in 10-degree weather to say goodbye. And they said, "Woman, 一定要送你," right? And I almost wanted to cry. It was pretty touching, right? This human interaction.
Right.
Please.
Also, just a quick follow-up on that, because you talked about the difference between transaction culture and relationship culture. But I feel like in the US, for example, on LinkedIn, like people are trying to do networking, for example, reaching out to others. And I feel like there is also a part that's like similar to the relation culture. So I think there definitely overlap. So how would you like distinguish this like transactional culture and relation culture?
So picture, if you will, I went to visit some of my clients in China that I hadn't seen because of COVID. And they were rolling out the carpet. They wanted to have a banquet, and they were fighting me to pay the bill. And they came laden with gifts. My customers inviting me, want to pay the bill, bring me gifts. And then I got back and I called the headquarters of that company. And I said, "Hey, guys, I just met with your whole team in Shanghai. We had a great meeting. I'd like to come and see you. And I understood that you've changed some management. Let me come. We'll have a dinner together. I'll see what I can do to make sure you're being well looked after in China." So it wasn't even a sales pitch, John. This was my existing customer, right? I wasn't asking them for anything. And they said, "We don't do that anymore. We all work from home, and we don't have an office anymore, and we don't really see one another. So I'm not sure if anybody will be interested." So whatever it is that you're doing that you think is successful, you can continue to do it, but see if you can bring it one step further to actually have baby steps. Would be voice communication. Actually talk to the people. And it's so weird. So if I were to ask you from your LinkedIn hundreds of contacts, can you name me 5 people that you've spoken to? Take baby steps, right? When I bring on student interns to learn about China, I tell them, if you're not willing to talk, then I'm the wrong mentor for you. I'm just not going to help. I won't be able to help you. I'm not a good talker, and I'm not an influencer. And the thing that I'm doing for a living is not sexy. It's not bikinis and booze and beach parties. So you got to go somewhere else. But I tell them, if you're not willing to talk, then don't bother. And I've had some great students working together with me. So I don't ignore the other stuff. If they want to put me on Twitter or put me here or there, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. It's fine. But getting to keep it human is so important. So make a goal. You're doing your social media stuff. Pick 5 people that you're going to actually talk to.
Mm.
But it's hard nowadays, though, because you want to say, hey, let's talk. And they're like, oh, my God, what do they want from me? They're going to steal from me? Are they a scammer? See if you can get people to talk a little bit. And a great way to start would be your professors or other people that are doing something that you're interested in is a really good way too.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I feel like a lot of the networking that we have done before is either like through Zoom or it's like transactional, like I want to get like the student wants to get like referral from the other person. But I think what's like really matter is really the connections that we're able to make. And also it should be genuine and like long term.
I think it's so important. And I'm very impressed, Xiaozhang, that you are studying philosophy as well, because you almost never meet a young Chinese person learning philosophy. It's either science, statistics, math, business, almost never that they're doing philosophy, which I think is great, because I learned Zhuangzi and Mengzi and Xi and Honglou Meng, and I'm doing business. I have guys who are investors and they're Ernst & Young, Forbes, whatever. But the thing that allowed me to be successful in my work was understanding the culture and how to approach people. And that's made the journey so much more interesting.
Yeah.
It's a struggle. It's a struggle for me too, because a lot of the customers don't want to meet anymore. They say, why would you do that? Why do you need to fly to Chicago to meet me for dinner? Just make a Zoom call. They don't get it anymore. It's harder.
Yeah, I think the trend is going back now. Like a lot of companies are trying to make in-person meetings instead of virtual ones.
I think it's really good. I think it's really good. So I met with the marketing professor in Florida State, and she had joined one of these dinners that I did, where I just called people up and said, hey, let's get together for dinner. And that led to me meeting her in Hong Kong because her father was dying of cancer. She took a semester in Hong Kong at the Baptist University. And I was in Hong Kong. We went for dim sum together. And there's something peculiarly Hong Kong style. If you go to a busy dim sum restaurant, normally a table can feed at least 6 people around the table. A bigger one is 12. And if it's a table for 6 and there's only 2 people at the table, other people can naturally come and sit down next to you, complete strangers. Now, if that happened in America, they'd either beat you up or shoot you, one or the other. But in Hong Kong, they'd sit down next to you. They'd get their own teapot and their own cups for their tea. And because I was chatting in Cantonese with Ruby Lee, just the 2 of us, suddenly our table filled up because all of these people were curious about the foreign devil speaking Cantonese. They came over and we were chatting and, where's your hometown and this and that. And we're all hanging out. And then she and I had coffee after, and then she ended up introducing me to one of her students. One of her graduates was working in China, an American boy, and he married a Chinese woman. And then they moved to Hawaii, where he finished law school. And then he ended up in Washington, D.C., working for the U.S.-China Business Council. And he called me up one day and he said, hey, Robert, the head of the U.S.-China Business Council, an ex-ambassador, is going to be in Miami in 2 weeks. You need to go and meet him. So I went to meet him. It's not something I planned, right? And then he introduced me to the professor, Chris Marquis, who made that podcast. Said, hey, Robert's got a lot of life experience. You should talk to that guy. And then the U.S.-China Business Council made that interview with me. And it's not something I had planned. It was because I had a dinner together with friends. You know what I mean? So I like to tell those stories where if you get people together, it can be so good. I worry for my son a little bit. He's just started medical school. Half of his classes are pre-recorded. He's sitting at a wraparound screen half the day in his apartment. It baffles me. And finally, at least 3 times a week, he's in laboratory classes where he can meet the other students. But this whole remote kind of stuff, I'm hopeful Eric, that in terms of the pendulum, that everything's gone cuckoo on the remote stuff, and then it'll somehow come back towards the middle.
Yeah, I think there's something about in person that you really can't replace, and I think people are starting to realize that, and it's going to start
So-
swinging back on the other end of the pendulum. And that's another reason why we should definitely have an in-person meetup
Great.
within the next couple of months, because we're both graduating this semester. So at the end of it, so definitely before May, we should have it.
Yeah, we should definitely do that. Let me know, and I'm happy to connect. And if any of the people that I know from my journeys and my travels and anything is any way helpful, I'm happy to introduce. Okay.
Yes, of course.
So much, Robert.
Well, Hung Gan Dong, I need to do Gong Xi Gong Xi Gong Xi Ni Ya Gong Xi Gong Xi Gong Xi Ni 每天大道小上每个人的嘴里第一句话就是恭喜恭喜恭喜恭喜恭喜你呀恭喜恭喜恭喜你
That's amazing. Oh my God. I can remember the lyrics.
And then they do 花开富贵年年有余万事如意出入平安龙马精神
Yeah,
步步
also
高
the
升
Chinese New Year is coming up. So
Yeah.
恭喜新年快乐.
新年快乐 They do like this, Eric. That's like a respect sign. You put your hands together like this. And then they say 恭喜恭喜 And then they give the kids the red packet. It's called the hongbao.
恭喜
Hongbao.
红包
They say 恭喜发财. That means wish you prosperity. And then the response is 红包拿来. Give me the red packet. Give me the money.
恭喜
Right.
红包
红包拿来. That's great. That's great. Okay, so I'll leave it with you guys to organize, and then we'll get together, okay?
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Sounds
In the
great.
meantime, have a happy Chinese New Year. Wish
You
you
too.
prosperity.
Yes. Only the best. It's great meeting you. And I have a soft spot to help young people because when I was first getting started with my China career, I had 100 job interviews. 100. I was like a psychotic nut. I was not going to take no for an answer, and I wanted to go to China. People offered me jobs in America. I didn't want it. Leave me alone. I'm going to China. Get out of my way.
Well, that takes persistence and tenacity.
And I was supposed to be there for a year, 30 years, and I'm still doing it. I lived full
Wow.
time in China for 30 years, and now I'm still going back and forth.
Wow. Wow. That's how one year turns into 30. That's
There we go. Craziness. Okay, so I will say 祝你健康平安. That means wish you health and peace. And I'll look forward to the next podcast, but more importantly, to the next gathering, okay?
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you so much, Robert. We'll definitely plan the in-person gathering.
Excellent.
definitely.
Okay. Take good care,
Okay.
guys.
You too. Bye bye. Thank you so much.
Bye. Sure. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.